nations, and shall rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. O house of Jacob, come ye, let us walk in the light of the Lord. Therefore thou hast forsaken thy people, the house of Jacob, because they be replenished.
Good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. Continuing in the book of Nahum, chapter 3. We went through the first verse of chapter 3. We read through actually the first several verses, but we discussed the first one. Woe to the bloody city, all full of lies and robbery, the prey departeth not. No end of victims, no end of their cruelty, no end of their deceit and thievery. The noise of the whip, and the noise of the rattling of the wheels, and of the prancing horses, and of the jumping chariots. The horseman lifteth up both the bright sword and the glittering spear. There is a multitude of slain, and a great number of carcases. There is none end of their corpses. They stumble upon their corpses. And so, the idea of the chariots rumbling through the city streets, it's no different than, when you're conquered in the modern age and the tanks are rolling through the streets. The enemy has control, and all the defenders are dead. And the enemy is victorious. But this is the vision Nahum has of Nineveh, her end. And I think we're going into Revelation, and the number of the army of the horsemen was 200,000. And the locust army has a lot of this similar type of descriptive language. But when it talks about the glittering spear and the bright sword, it's just the visuals of defeat. It's like it's at one time kind of, from one perspective, it's kind of, there's a, to the victor especially, but there's a beauty in all that flashing metal, and it's kind of a spectacle. But also there's a lot of dead people, a great multitude of slain, great number of carcasses. Carcasses is for dead animals, but there would be a number of carcasses also. There's none end of their corpses. That's a special word that we only use for humans, at least in English. They stumble on their corpses. That's a lot of corpses, They're just stumbling. There's so many that they are stumbling over them as they walk. I'm trying to walk and talk, and I'm stumbling over corpses left and right. There were some battles, I believe in the Civil War or World War I, wherever, battles, but I remember it being said of a certain battle somewhere that you could walk from horizon to horizon. One could walk from horizon to horizon without his feet touching the ground, merely, just stepping on corpses. And the Assyrians, because, why does this come on the Assyrians? Why, we talked about their cruelty, but it's not like they're the first nation ever to be cruel, but in their cruelty, they made many enemies. That's one of the reasons why, dictatorships that are ruled by force and cruelty you have to maintain them with force and cruelty. And eventually people become fed up. I mean, I'm trying to think. Like, you think about the dictatorial leadership that still exists today that have existed for any length of time. Like let's say the Saudis. That's a royal family that has existed for a long time. I don't know how far they go back, but they're still there, and they're still ruling, which is important. Like the British crown, for one. If you think about it, understand like the Stuarts ended with the execution of Charles, who had his head cut off by Cromwell, and the British Republicans, and many cruel leaders, or even marginally cruel, or dynasties that were unwanted, found their end. I say unwanted, but they were found to be wanting. They found their end through violence, and these things come upon them. Even upon generations later, where it's like the cruelty of the past is more in the past. But even the modern ones, you wonder, how long can this last? How long before people throw this off? It's really, because I don't know, you look at what they do in certain parts of the world. You think that these dictators think that they can maybe harness technology to make sure that they never fall from power. It's frightening. We thought we would change the world by just exposing them to economic prosperity. It does change things, doesn't it? It makes people more covetous. I don't know if it helps them love freedom, self-rule. I don't know what it is. The two things are not always the same. Anyways, a lot of bodies, a lot of corpses. Reminds me of Revelation when they call, "Come and gather yourselves together." In the end of chapter 19, the call goes forth to all the birds of the air. I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice to all the fowls that fly in the midst of heaven, "Come and gather yourselves together to the supper of the great God, that ye may eat the flesh of kings, and eat the flesh of captains, the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses, and them that sit on them, and the flesh of all men, both free and bond, both small and great." And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the throne, and against his armies. And the beast was taken, and with him the false prophets, which wrought miracles before them, which had the mark of the beast, and them that had worshipped his image. These both were cast alive into a lake of fire, burning with brimstone. And the remnant were slain with the sword of him that sat upon the horse, the white horse described earlier in the chapter, the Lord Jesus, which sword proceeded out of his mouth, and all the fowls were filled with their flesh. The corpses are piled up. This is what happens. People come into conflict. They don't want, God is the enemy of his enemies. They hate him. They will resist. You think it's not possible? Who has resisted God? Well, in some way, it isn't possible, except to the degree that God doesn't just snap his fingers and change reality. He lets them resist as much as they like, as much as it pleases them to. You know what I mean? They can show their hatred as deeply as they want. Their purpose is to hate. Because of the multitude of the whoredoms of the well-favored harlot, the mystery was a good slip, the mistress of witchcrafts, that selleth nations through her whoredoms, and families through her witchcrafts. And, the whoredoms and stuff, again, we're talking on Nineveh, but it does remind me, of course, of Revelation, Mystery Babylon. And the great whore is see, here's the thing. It's kind of confusing because, like, what in this case, I mean, we did Hosea, right? In Hosea, Israel was the whore. And now, the whore is, the symbolic whore is Nineveh. And in the book of Revelation, it's Babylon. And each of those successively was the punishment of God upon the other. The Assyrians were the punishment of God on Israel. The Babylonians are the punishment of God on Nineveh. And so, Mystery Babylon also has this sort of moment where she's, judged. And it says, "For by thy sorceries were all nations deceived." Sorceries, witchcraft. And I don't take this idea of witchcraft here literally. Well, obviously, because it's a symbolic reference. And it's not saying like, oh yeah, Nineveh and all their witchcraft is what, they deceive the nation by literal castings of spells. But there are, here's the thing. There are greater and lesser forms of spells. And sometimes, like, when a young man falls in love with a young woman preferably, when they fall in love, it's like there's a spell cast over them sometimes. Like we could speak that way poetically, and it has been said that way poetically. But that's truly harmless. It's like love is like some sort of magic, right? It's not, because why do we call it that? Because we don't really understand. There's an aspect to which we don't know how it works. You know what I mean? We know that certain things cause it to happen. You know what I mean? We know what there are things that bring about love, but how it actually works and all that is a little bit mysterious, isn't it? Unless you've got it all figured out, which, to this day, there are plenty of people who swear that no one does, right? In fact, the Bible even says there are some mysteries that are too wonderful for me. The way of an eagle in the sky, the way of this, the way of that, and the way of a young man with a maid. It's a mystery. And he's speaking of romance and love. Right? And there's also like a magic of lust. You know what I mean? Which is not wholesome. There's a magic of lust. And we know things that are put into it. They paint their faces. That's why it's like, I always find it a bit, I understand the attraction of painting your face, but it's like for everyday use, and it's certainly, I understand someone has a blemish they want to cover or something like that, or something unsightly. I guess only because I never do it, And they're like, oh, I've got a blemish, I've got to cover it. But I understand. Especially for those who are under the spell of romantic love, there's a lot of reasons why they want to cover things up. Fine. But they are the same tools are put to because I don't think they're exclusive to harlots, but they are the tools of harlots also. So one must be careful how we use these things. Now I'm speaking in a spiritual sense, though. How so? Because the same idea is that as a harlot uses her, the tools of her trade to attract customers, so does Assyria. So does Mystery Babylon in the book of Revelation. They use their tools to attract customers. And what is that? Well, they're various seductive things. Seductive in a non-sexual sense. I mean, in a non-carnal sense. Things that are seductive. I mean, it might be somewhat carnal. Like immediately I think with Assyria. Well, Assyria would, and this is very common practice in ancient times and to this day, they're always like foreign nations trying to subvert agents of our nation to provide them with information, or for to spy on their own country. That happened during the Soviets, and stuff. And it happens even now to this day. There are people getting paid by foreign governments to conduct espionage on America, and they are Americans being paid to do this. And they've been seduced like a harlot, or like the country paying them is seducing them with their attractive offers. Now, some of these witchcrafts it can be like, oh, wow, wouldn't that be nice to enjoy the company of a beautiful young lady? But you understand with Assyria, some of the witchcraft was like, stuff like, you will serve us or we will impale you on spikes. That's a spell too. It's a very powerful sort of magic. Put a few people up on spikes, all of a sudden all the grumbling starts getting quiet. You get people to kind of shut up. We'll just put all the heads of the villages on spikes. I meant the leaders of the villages. You could put their heads on spikes, though, or whatever. I'm just using that as a general idea of brutality. We'll work something really brutal. We'll take all their children and kill them in front of their faces. Show them we mean business. And that'll work a magical spell on them. Because they'll be so shocked, they will cease to resist. They'll be so broken. They'll have no power to fight. Fight for what? There's nothing left to fight for. We killed all your children. Now be good little citizens and send us your taxes. We even tried the same things like when we invaded Iraq back in the beginning of this century. There was the shock and awe campaign. The idea was to have a campaign of bombing that would be so intense that it would shock people into submission. Didn't work, though. Somehow bombs and they are wonderful and amazing and shocking, but they're not so... They're like big fireworks. Something about big explosions isn't so shocking. It's not personal enough. Also, if a bomb blows up next to you and you don't die, it emboldens you. There's been studies on this. It makes you feel basically invincible. It makes people braver to make them come close to death. And the victims of bombs are less easy to see. They're just kind of gone. It's not quite as up close and personal as doing something very nasty to one of their family members. And this is just how this kind of evil works. There's a lot of evil, and when you think of witchcraft in terms of spells that are cast over the mind, and a lot of times, people think about, and this is a pity because people don't understand how witchcraft works, like the real witchcraft. Not the silly Wiccan playing around with candles and mystical signs garbage. But what that is saying is what it's saying is like, if I, it's like, well, I have newts and blah, 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 all the silly ingredients. They light some candles and do all these things and they make it happen. What it's a substitute for is taking other ingredients, like I'll take some duct tape and tie this person up and their family will do what I say. That's that kind of kidnapping, and that's because I don't believe in the other kind. I don't believe in circles of candles and mystical symbols and magical spells in that way. But there is a kind of, we don't understand it, sorcery or witchcraft, that, we understand it better now than we ever have in the past. Because anything that's going on in the world, but in the past it would just be witchcraft. We put a spell on the population, we had, somebody would go and do something terrible to a bunch of animals and realize it had an effect on things. I wonder if we use people, if it'll have an even better effect. And whoa, it does. Human sacrifice is really effective to scare humans and to make them pliable to your will. Anyways, so she has whoredoms and witchcrafts being combined is the idea of a sort of a seductive kind of thing. It's not all seductive, though. Some of it's brutal for them. Selleth nations through her whoredoms, families through her witchcrafts. They use varying, what it's saying basically, and I take this in the more, like I said, the broad sense, that they have methods. You know what I mean? There are things they do. And you could also look at it in the terms of Assyria, like what was Nahum thinking of? Like, that's an important aspect of it. What was he thinking of? Not Paul, just what is your take on witchcraft? What is he thinking of? Well, like I said, if there's a sort of a witchcraft of harlotry, a seductive, because I don't step back from that at all, then the Assyrians' witchcraft is, in his eyes, might be the way they're able to seduce, people from within nations to betray their fellow countrymen and even their families. And certainly, the Assyrians did lead many people into captivity. The whole nation of Israel, for the most part, led into captivity. Whole families taken captive. And the idea she is a well-favored harlot. They grow rich. The Assyrians prospered for a while. Their empire spread. You know what I mean? These spreading empires start off, however they start off, but they eventually prophetically are all regarded as a form of prostitute. I can see our nation in the way we begin to become a prostitute. We start to, people try to buy our favor, but then in a way, we try to start to work our magic on others. Because the thing is, prostitution isn't just buying sex from someone. It's a trade. You know what I mean? It's like they are trading their goods for someone else's. Money for this. And so in so doing, they prepare the table. They make themselves look good. Or as a nation, they might make themselves look powerful. Technically speaking, it's a transaction. So, a nation can be spending money in being a harlot. Because on some level, the nation is betraying some fundamental principle of their nation or fundamental principle of right and wrong. And that's what ultimately makes it harlotry. That's what makes it a form of, corruption. Because it's not, a woman should, no one should lightly sell themselves. I don't say anyone does it lightly, but what I'm saying is like selling yourself, selling your body is a tremendously self-destructive behavior. It's not like, it's not what you're for, The purpose of the reproductive function is reproduction and should be reserved for that for the most part within the confines of a marriage because that is the most, because that is the one way which is conducive to healthy child rearing. There isn't other ways. There's a right way and there's a wrong way. And so the Syrian selling nations through her whoredoms, families through her witchcrafts, and also, you remember in Revelation, the great whore Babylon, and there is found the souls of slaves and souls of men. There are men being sold, humans being sold inside that great whore also. Human beings being traded upon, sold, bought and sold like animals. That's what I'm saying. It's like when you sell yourself as a harlot, you're buying and selling in your own self as an animal. And oftentimes, the prostitutes rely on some sort of, if they rely on some sort of pimp, or sometimes there's someone who's selling them. Quite often there's someone who's selling the prostitute, the middleman. And that's definitely, that's at some point it's like a form of slavery. Even if it's voluntary, because you're being sold. You're being sold to one person, sold to the other. For the sake of money. So it's not good. It's not good to be in that position. Behold, I'm against thee, saith the Lord of hosts. What am I going here? And I will discover thy skirts on thy face, and I will show the nations thy nakedness, and the kingdoms thy shame. And I will cast abominable filth upon thee, and make thee vile, and will set thee as a gazingstock. And it shall come to pass that all that shall look upon thee shall flee from thee, that all they that look upon thee shall flee from thee, and say, Nineveh is laid waste. Who will bemoan her? Whence shall I seek comforters for thee? Yeah. I will discover. It's because her actions are not, just merely, this is like a super, just like the great whore Babylon. She's a great whore, but she's not like a lowly whore. She is a queen, or she sees herself as such, and in her is all this merchandise being traded, because it's representing a nation that's like a prostitute. Selling itself in that sense to the king. There is even, I think of Isaiah 57, where there's a sort of like, she sold herself to another king than me. And that analogy gets picked up and thrown throughout the prophets. There's a lot of the whole, like I said, that Isaiah 57, thou wentest to the king with ointments, and didst increase thy perfumes, and did send thy messengers afar off, and didst debase thyself even to hell. It's all this going about to work things contrary to God's will, going about to work things that are contrary to righteousness. All this activity, commerce in evil. Because that's the commerce of Babylon. It's not just commerce itself, though that all gets caught up in it. You know what I mean? But the root of the thing is the evil that's being done, the harlotry that's being done. And I mean that in the spiritual sense, which, of course, I'm not mentioning it because it's not really relevant to Nineveh. When it was Israel, it was because they'd gone astray from the Lord. But here it's like just because they went astray from the righteousness which God preached to them through Jonah. They went astray from the good that God had warned them of the evil to come. And in one generation they repented, but it didn't last. Something my eyes are hurting. Oh, I got a half hour to go. It did not last. And so now he's against her to punish her. And I will discover thy skirts upon thy face. It's a pretty obvious visual analogy. Your skirts lifted up, exposing the privates, right? And you're gonna, it's like for guys we say get caught with your pants down. She gets caught with her skirts up. and showing nations thy nakedness and kingdoms thy shame. And there is there have been plenty of prophets who says, you all these things, yet you were not ashamed, which is even worse. But here's the thing, whether you're ashamed or not, it's shameful. Here's the thing, you can say you don't care, but everyone else does. You know what I mean? That's the funny thing, is like, people do, they'll do things. You think about what a huge business pornography is. And you think like every one of those girls has a dad somewhere, probably not such a good relationship, right? Or a mom, maybe not such a good relationship, who knows, right? But there's, they who know you are ashamed of you, They would be. They should be. And if they're not, it still is. It still is shameful to be seen with yourself exposed. And it's many people, I remember, I'm not going to say the guy's name because it's a famous person, but I'm just not going to mention their name. But they sued because some friend and the friend's wife conspired and filmed the guy naked, or having sex with her. This is something very, people are corrupt. And they tricked him and sort of seduced him, right? And they filmed him, and then they put it out for everyone to see, and he was humiliated by that. They didn't want that to be seen. It's like, it's not necessarily, your best moment. Some guys might think it was a moment for bragging, but not everyone feels that way. It's like, I don't want everyone to see me doing something evil, wicked, essentially. They may have this sense of they want to keep that private, right? And I understand there's an impulse. It's like when we do evil, we want to keep it private generally. But just because some people feel I'm not ashamed, I'll do whatever in public, you're still shameful. Everyone's still ashamed of you. Just because you're too dense to care, or you're so hardened you don't care. You've hardened yourself, hardened your heart. So what? You're still ashamed. No, but you've lost all respect. It doesn't carry forward, Discover thy skirts upon thy face, will show nations thy nakedness and kingdoms thy shame. I will expose your nakedness and your shame to other people. And of course, this is ultimately a spiritual sense, right? Whether it be whatever kind of greediness or covetousness or evil that someone does or a nation does, they try to kind of keep it under wraps, Even our our nation, I remember when they talked about, there was a news story some while back about they talked about some other country that has people assassinated. And I think it was the president who said, well, we do that. And people are like, oh, we don't, but it's like, we don't ever, we never have. Is it equivalent and blah, blah, blah. People are trying to say, is it the same? I mean, when we do it, it doesn't count, right? I mean, talking about blindness. It's like, you're private, it's the same spirit that leads people to stone someone who committed adultery who themselves commit adultery. I mean, they think nobody knows I did it, so I can participate in in this person's stoning because nobody knows what I did. They think their deeds are hidden. It's because that's the sexual parts is a good analogy of hidden deeds. Because it's a part everyone keeps hidden all the time. At least in public. Nobody publicly, People sort of do, but the only place you can put that is in harlotry and pornography. And what he's saying is a nation is like that. I'm going to show the nation how profane and what a whore you are. You're such a whore nation. You just absolutely sell yourself. You sell out for whatever you sell righteousness for cheap. And I'm going to expose all the things you're ashamed of to the light of day. And I will cast abominable filth upon thee and make thee vile. Abominable filth. I mean, to be honestly, it's hard for me not to think of the male issue. I mean, that would issues from a male in terms of prostitutes, pornography, and this abominable filth. Because what else could be filthy? It's something that goes out of someone that's unclean. The most abominable forms of uncleanness are things that involve blood and bodily fluids. And other bodily excretions, That's the most, or rotting carcasses. I don't know. Just because the analogy is kind of we're using the shameful things of the natural processes which people keep hidden and which are generally reserved for we formalize, the marriage relationship is like this formal relationship within which there's like this agreement of loyalty and cooperation and duty and all these things that are tied into it to make that safe. And that's the funny thing is like we've taken a lot of the danger out of it, and I don't say I want to put the danger back in, but women, if they get pregnant now, the state is ready to step in and they'll support you. You don't even need no man. You're a strong, independent woman who has the government to supply everything the man would supply, right? You're such a strong, independent woman. And it's like, yeah, without all that assistance, how would you do? Well, I'm sure there are plenty of independent women who could deal without the government assistance and do because they have high-paying jobs. I'm just saying there's a lot of very poor single mothers. And I'm not saying we should put the, make it harder for them again. But we took that all out. But that helped people understand the stigma. Now we just see the stigma through the rotten children that come out of those things. Not that all of them are rotten, but there are an increase in the number of kids that are fatherless. And fatherless kids are missing something in their life that's very important. Anyone who denies that is a fool. Well, they can overcome it, of course. Of course they can. But it's like, when I say rotten kids, I guess it's not really fair. But, you know what I'm saying? It's like it will rot your relationship. I promise that. Not everyone. But I'm just saying it's like, I don't know. It rots many relationships because it's not an easy thing to handle. It's like, I know you're saying, but my kid's wonderful. Yeah, yours is, but they aren't all wonderful. Some of them need a father's touch and exposure to that. Or to some other male of the family. There's a lot of reasons why mothers end up single. It's not meant to be an indictment of all single motherhood. Whatever, do your best. Well, all I'm saying is that marriage is preferable. And single motherhood is nothing like prostitution, all right? So, just so I can cover that ground. Just so you understand, I'm not comparing the two. What I'm saying is, I'm comparing the harlotry to the exact opposite, which is a married, stable relationship that's meant to bring forth children. Prostitution isn't supposed to bring out anything except a cash transaction. Cast abominable filth upon thee, and make thee vile. Set thee as a gazingstock. There's always that sort of like the whore defiled imagery. I like when Jezebel, the evil queen, during the time of the prophet Elijah, when she's cast from her window, the dogs lick her blood. Or is that Ahab? No, I think the dogs licked her blood. And there's something kind of, dogs were considered very unclean animals, and it was kind of like a very disreputable end. I'm saying I'm going to make something of a spectacle of you, of your end, O Nineveh, O Babylon, O mysterious whore of the Revelation. And it shall come to pass that all they that look upon thee shall flee from thee and say, Nineveh is laid waste, who will bemoan her? When shall I seek comforters for thee? So basically what they're saying is, people will see this, the ruin. I think again of Revelation where all the merchants of the earth and the great that were made rich by her shall stand far off for the fear of her torment, weeping and wailing and saying, Alas, alas, that great city. There was wherein were made rich all the headships in the sea, by reason of her costliness. For in 1 hour is thy judgment come. All of them were enriched by her. But then when she falls, all these friends, are false. They don't stick around at her fall. They abandon her. All her lovers go away in the fall. Because, because the customers of prostitutes hate prostitutes. They do. I've never seen one. I mean, I might have seen one, but I've never seen one. You know what I mean? And but I've heard of like guys who like murdered them and stuff because they hated paying. They hated the whore. These shall hate the whore and make her desolate and naked and burn her with fire. A lot of the vengeance of the Lord is simply also the vengeance of her lovers. You know what I mean? Kind of finally having their fill of her. And her witchcraft and her tiresome behavior. Tiresome being an understatement. Nineveh is laid waste. Who will bemoan her? The merchants, at least from far away in Babylon. But who will comfort her? Who will be there? Who's going to be close at hand to feel sorry about the fall of this nation, which was so cruel? There's, like the Lord said of Nineveh before, hey, you were mad because I preached repentance to the Ninevites. You'd rather I just destroy this city? It's full of people who don't know their right hand from their left. They didn't really know what they're doing. And also much cattle. The animals, the carcass, you want the animals all to die too? Because that's how it is in the end. Everything gets killed. Just because war, war just killed. War in the old days killed a lot of horses, killed a lot of animals. And a lot of animals would be killed just to get the army moving. None of us lay waste who will bemoan her. Where am I going to find anyone to comfort you? Nobody cares. Nobody likes you. I thought better than populace. No. I think this is Napf. I gotta look this up because I didn't, like I said, I don't really prepare ahead of time, and I didn't see this. I forgot this reference. Populous no coming. It's not a big. It's a historical reference on Nahum's part. Populous no. No, Amun, not Naf. It's it's not a Hebrew word. It's an Egyptian word meaning the Egyptian god Amun. No is the Egyptian Nut, meaning the city. Now known as Thebes. So I guess the old name of Thebes was Noamon. Well, because of the reference to rivers, I thought it was in Egypt. Oh well. Oh, we're gonna get through. Okay, let's there are a couple more verses here. Art thou better than the rivers were abounded, whose rampart was the sea, her wall was the sea, was from the sea. Ethiopia and Egypt were her strength, and it was infinite. Put and Lubim were thy helpers. Yet was she carried away, she went into captivity. Her young children also were dashed in pieces at the top of all the streets, and they cast lots for her honorable men, and all her great men were bound in chains. You know? Doesn't matter what specific city it was. You think you're better than the nation when this happened before? No. Populous? No. Right? It was situated in the rivers. It was between rivers. Waters. It was all round about with waters. Its rampart was the sea. Her wall came out of the ocean to protect it, I guess. You know? Or maybe not the ocean. It could be also sometimes they have a sea of reeds they refer to. I mean, what he's saying is it's well defended. Better defended than you were, Assyria. Better equipped to resist this invasion than you. Are you better? No, you're not. They were more populous. I mean, more better defended. I don't know if they were more popular. Maybe they were more populous. That's why he mentions it. They were bigger, stronger, better defended. It's probably some time back, I think. I don't know, because, their history would go back. They would have a more detailed version of the 100 years before they lived than we do of their time. It might be referring back into the Bronze Age. Ethiopia and Egypt were her strength. The Ethiopia there, the neighbor to the south of Egypt. There was a lot of trade and commerce between those parts of Africa. Put and Lubim, again, other African ancient nations. I think might have some Sudan or something. Sudan used to be part of Egypt, I think. I think actually one of those is actually Libya. And she was carried away. She went into captivity. Despite having the sea on one side and the rivers and all that, and being surrounded with water, and being populous and full of noble men and defenders, she went into captivity. Her young children also were dashed in pieces at the top of all the streets. That's what they did. Who's going to take care of the baby? Don't worry about that. We'll take care of the baby. That's what happens. You're all going into slavery. You don't need to worry about babies anymore. Don't worry about your family anymore. You have a new life you're about to enjoy. as our servants. They cast lots. I was a big... Do you know who I am? I think you're going to be my dung shoveler. Actually, is what who you are. If I win this role, anyways. I'm a very important person you're important in no? There is no no. We're burning no to the ground. You're not important anywhere. People have this sense of like, I'm so important in my little world. It's so fragile. So fragile. Even to this day, we just so take it for granted. People's minds, I don't know if they could even handle what would it be like if society breaks down. People toy so lightly with burning it all down. Having no idea, they just want to end the system. The horrible system that brought about because it didn't turn out perfect. They want to bring an end to the systems that nurtured them. I think of our time, all the people who desire to overthrow probably the most, a nation that provided better for its people than any other nation on the face of the world in any other time. Provided for the most number of people the greatest good. They want to throw it all over. Try something else that's failed 1,000 times. Her young children dash in pieces at the top of all the streets, and they cast lots for her honorable men and all our great men. Of course, look at Revelation, same idea. It's like when it talked about Jezebel in chapter 2 or 3, I will burn her children with fire. And all the churches shall know that I am he that searcheth the reins and hearts. Now I will kill her children with death. Why burn with fire? No, it's I will kill her children with death. And there it means in a sense of not actual children, but in metaphorical children. Like the way we are metaphorically the child. They can say, I'm a child of the 80s or something like that. Or I'm a child of, or I'm a disciple of some minister, then I'm sort of metaphorically like their child. Paul even played with that. You have many teachers in the faith, you have not many fathers. Not that anyone should, call no man your father upon the earth, but it's not wrong to say, well, he's like a father to me. All our great men bound in chains. Oh, yes, the great and powerful men bound up in chains. Oh, okay. And I think we got quite a bit of chapter left, which is good because we're going to have one more day for sure. All right, well. Thou also shalt be drunken. Thou shalt be hid. Thou also shalt seek strength because of the enemy. All thy strongholds shall be like fig trees with first ripe figs. If they be shaken, they shall even fall into the mouth of the eater. So, thou also shalt be drunken. We haven't used the drunken analogy here. That's something that comes up in prophecy frequently. Because what's the idea of drunkenness is you drink too much alcohol, and you become into like a different state. You lose inhibitions, you become drunken. You lose coordination, you lose sense of a lot of things. You lose your senses. Literally, you become numb sometimes. Become less susceptible to pain. Less susceptible to clear thinking. Less a lot of things. And so there's this idea of sort of filling yourself up with drink, meaning, Like they say, we use the idea of drunk with power, right? Or punch drunk. But it refers to that state where someone has been so inundated with a certain kind of stimulation that it has overwhelmed their senses and brought them to a different state of being. That's why there is a spiritual drunkenness that comes from being seduced by the devil. There's a spiritual drunkenness that comes from, continually participating in a particular, maybe some sort of idolatrous thing or some sort of, drunk with love, drunk with whatever. But the idea is that as alcohol affects someone and deadens their senses when they have too much, the idea is that you get too much of something else that makes you drunken. And it's often used also of battle or of punishment, of being drunken with the punishments that God would inflict on them. It was like they were filled up and overwhelmed by them. I don't know. And it also might mean that they were literally drunk. The Assyrians might have been drunk with their own power in a sense and thereby become careless. And their soldiers may have been not watching very carefully, thinking no evil can come upon us. We're the most powerful nation in the world as far as we're concerned. There's nobody who can challenge us. And so they were drunk with power, and they became, and oftentimes being overcome, losing our senses through something like being drunk with power, or being drunk with success, or being drunk with our own vanity. It will lead us to taking for granted other things and lead to greater carelessness in other areas. And so the defense was not prepared. Their soldiers may have been not watching properly, whatever. Thou shalt be hid, thou shalt also seek strength because of the enemy. Thou shalt be hid. That verse seems odd. Wait a second. Verse what? Let's look at verse 11. I need some translations here. Because that does, thou shalt be hid. In what sense is that meant? I'm going to write to the NIV. Since they're going to interpret it, what do they think? You would go into hiding. You seek refuge from the enemy. Okay. Well, I guess that's I didn't expect. What did I have? Seek strength. Oh, strength, a strong place. I get it. Thou shalt seek a strong place. Oftentimes, strength refers to like a stronghold. So, this is like when it talks about they shall go into the dens and the rocks and the tops of the ragged rocks to hide themselves from the face of the Lord and from the fury of his wrath and from the glory of his majesty. They hide themselves from the bad things that they want to avoid. They want to hide. It's natural. So here they will seek strength, meaning seek a strong place to hide in. So there's got to be some place to hide. You're going to sleep off this drunkenness and sober up and then come back and fight another day. But all thy strongholds shall be like fig trees with the first ripe figs. If they be shaken, they shall even fall into the mouth of the eater. Last year for the first time I had a fig. Not the dried ones you get in Fig Newtons or the ones you can buy in the store. You can never buy these. I don't know why. Maybe they just don't travel well. Probably not. Because they're like these little soft, mushy bags. They're very sweet. They're sweet, but they're very nicely sweet. And they're full of little seeds. This little fig. I'm going to get fig trees next year. But they're like... And when they're first ripe... Like if the tree has ripening figs and you shake it, the ones that are ripe ahead of schedule will fall off, and they plop. They're very soft. But it's the kind of thing when, if you go along and it's not time to harvest, you find a fig, you don't store it. You know what I mean? Because usually if you're going to preserve figs, you're going to do a bunch of them. Just like with canning, right? You don't can one tomato. Canning is a process by which, I don't know why they don't call it jarring, because they jar it. It's all putting stuff in jars, you know what I mean? Canning. Whatever. But in canning is the process of making jars of vegetables and fruit, you know what I mean, right? And you don't do one tomato. You do a bunch, because it's a big process to do this. So you don't do just one, you do 101 or 1,000 tomatoes, whatever. You do a lot of tomatoes. You want to do as many as you can, because you just want to do a day where you're canning, and then you get a bunch of all these jars of vegetables from your garden and stuff like that. Right? But you're not going to can your figs when you got just one. The first ripe one, what do? You eat it. You just eat it, because they don't keep. Right? And that's what it's saying. Your strongholds are like that. As soon as they're found, they're going to be eaten up, because they're not meant to last. All you got to do is be shaken a bit. There's a little bit of just a little of attack, a little bit of an assault, and they will fall into the mouth of the eater, into the hands of the enemy. Okay, so we'll go on. We'll continue with verse 13 next time. Thanks for joining me today. We will be back tomorrow with another study. Until then. Here's a song.
And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. O house of Jacob, come ye, let us walk in the light of the Lord. Therefore thou hast forsaken thy people, the house of Jacob.